What's the difference between Canadian and American pronunciation? What's the difference? Do you know? Well, I think there's two issues here. Are we talking about accent or the pronunciation of certain words? Okay, we pronounce certain words very differently. For example, look at this letter. In American English, it's pronounced Z, and Canadians say Z. Okay, that's a difference. It's a very conscious difference. Okay, take a look at this word. Foyer or foyer. Which one is it? Okay, this front room in a building is called a foyer or a foyer. Now, Americans say foyer. Okay, this might be the foyer of a hotel, the main lobby, the front room of a hotel. And Canadians would say foyer. Foyer. Okay, so there's another conscious difference. Okay, and we also have some different vocabulary that we use. Okay, like washroom and bathroom. But Canadians say bathroom as well. Maybe we just say washroom a little bit more. Okay, so there are differences between Canadian English and American English. But when we're talking about the accent, they're actually very similar. It's a very similar accent. Now, when people think about the Canadian accent, they always say this, oot and a boot. Oot and a boot. Actually, we don't say that. We say out and about. It's not oot and a boot. It's out and about. Okay, this means going out of your house and doing normal daily activities. Okay, maybe you go out and you go shopping, you fill in gas, you pick up the mail, and then you come home. And I ask you, where were you? You could say, oh, I was just out and about, just doing normal things. Okay, now there's something called Canadian raising. Canadian raising. That's where Canadians change the sound of certain diphthongs. Okay, a diphthong is when we have two vowel sounds next to each other, and they almost make one sound. Okay, like this. Ow, ow, ow. Okay, like if someone hits you, you can say ow, ow. Okay, now Canadian raising is when Canadians change these two diphthongs. Okay, I and ow. Now, we change these before voiceless consonants. Before voiceless consonants. Okay, take a look at these words. Around. Now, Canadians and Americans say this word exactly the same. Around, around. But, look at this word. About. About. Okay, Canadians change it because T is a voiceless consonant. And this diphthong comes before the voiceless consonant. So we change the sound of it a little bit. Okay, an American would say around, about. The same sound. Canadians say around, about. It's a little bit different. Can you hear the difference? Okay, so this is what's happening in Canadian raising. Now, if you haven't seen my lesson on pronunciation of vowels in English, you can go watch that so that you understand this a little bit more. But it's not very important. This is just showing what's happening in Canadian raising. Okay, so let's take a sound like I. Okay, I. Now, look at the word bike. Bike, bike, bike. Americans would say bike. Okay, but Canadians say bike, bike. It's changed a little bit because k is a voiceless consonant. Okay, so it gets raised a little bit. Instead of starting down here, it starts up here. I, bike, bike. Okay, it's the same for the sound ow, ow. So Americans would say house, house, but Canadians say house, house. Okay, so instead of starting down here, we start up here. House, house. Okay, so that's what Canadian raising is. And that's the most distinct difference, I think, between the American accent and the Canadian accent. There are some other differences. For example, we say sorry, and Americans say sorry. Sorry, sorry, okay? We make that sound the long O, sorry. And so there are other words that are like this as well, where Canadians say the long O and Americans say ah. Okay, so that's, one difference. But when people talk about the American accent, I always think it's a little bit funny because which accent? There are so many different American accents. The USA is a big country. There's a lot of different accents. Okay, like the accent that someone would have down here is very different than they would have up there. It's a very strong, the southern accent is very strong. For example, they might say, I'm gonna start a fire down Mississippi. Okay, so it's a very strong accent. And someone up here in Minnesota actually would speak more closely to a Canadian. Their accent is more similar to the Canadian accent than it is to the Louisiana accent. And they're both Americans, right? This person and this person, they're both Americans. This person, they're all Americans, but they speak very differently, okay? So I think it's a little bit funny when people talk about the American accent because really there are lots of different American accents. So are there differences between Canadian English and American English? Yeah, there are some differences. But when it comes to accent, I think they're very similar. Okay, so I want to know, can you hear the difference between the Canadian accent and the American accent? Very often, I can't even hear the difference. I've done a lot of traveling around the world, and I've met a lot of Americans, and sometimes they think I'm American. Actually, most of the time, they think I'm American. And sometimes I meet Canadians, and I think they're Americans, or I meet Americans, and they're actually Canadians, or I think they're Americans and they're actually Canadians. Okay, so really there's not a huge difference. You have to have really good ears to hear the difference. So if you can hear the difference, you have really, really good listening skills. But anyway, let me know if you can hear the difference down there in the comments, and I'll see you over in the next episode of Mad English TV. Take care.